Howdy folks, and welcome to another episode of Mingles with Jingles. Thank you, by the way, of course, to everybody who supports me on Patreon. Thanks to you. These Mingles with Jingles episodes remain advert-free. First thing this week. A couple of weeks back, I decided that it was high time I started using my World of Warships community contributor powers for good, instead of exclusively for evil. Because we share a Discord server with the World of Warships development team, and we're actually able to put questions to them directly. And so I decided, well, why the hell not use it? Any questions that you guys have for the World of Warships developers, let me know, and I will present your questions to them. It turns out the timing could have been a little bit better. It was a couple of weeks since I collected questions from you for the developers, but in those 2 weeks we've had the aircraft carrier reveal. We've had the submarines in the upcoming Halloween special event reveal. They have been kind of busy, but they have managed to get back to me with the answers to the questions that I posed to them on your behalf. So the first thing we're going to do this week is just crack right on. I'll read you out the questions, and then I'll read you out the answers from the developers, and where necessary I might add a few comments of my own. The questions are in no particular order, although we're going to get some of the more popular ones out of the way first. Unsurprisingly, one of the most popular questions, and I swear I'm not making this up, was when are you going to add me into the game as a captain? I swear I'm not making this one up. You guys know what you want, and you're not afraid to ask for it. Well, the answer to that one was simply pay close attention to the upcoming relaunch of the Ring contest, which I have to admit I was expecting. Last I heard, the Ring contest was going to be relaunched in September, and there isn't much of September left, but, well, then again, they have been quite busy announcing and revealing new stuff in World of Warships this month, so I suppose we can forgive them, but I'm sure it's going to be happening again soon. And I can pretty much guarantee you at this point that I will be making an appearance in the game one way or the other, no matter what happens. I don't care what it takes, it's going to happen. But yeah, thank you, by the way, everybody, for continuing to needle the World of Warships developers on this subject. And moving on to question 2, which by far was actually the most popular question asked. Radar mechanics. Specifically, it's not really radar, it's a magic spell. It can see through solid objects. And this was probably the biggest overall issue when it came to the kind of questions that you wanted the devs to address. The answer from the dev team was, radar in its current form has been something we've been monitoring and we're looking into with a view to refining. Now, they're obviously not going into details here, it's obviously far too early for them to reveal whatever plans they have. But the fact that they are actually looking at the radar situation with a view to refining it is good news. It probably won't surprise you to hear that we community contributors have also been discussing the radar situation at quite some length recently. It seems to be a bit of a hot topic. There have been all kinds of suggestions, ranging from if a ship uses its radar, it should also be revealed to everybody within radar range, which makes sense if you think about it. This is why ships in a modern naval task force, for example, won't all be transmitting on radar at the same time. Instead, you'll have radar pickets, you'll have ships out on the outskirts who will be transmitting on radar intermittently to make it more difficult for any enemy units to pinpoint their location. Because that's the thing about radar, it works both ways. In fact, you can pick up somebody transmitting on radar at much further range than they can actually get a radar return on you. So that was one suggestion. My suggestion was that we introduce a new radar jammer consumable. It would have to have a very short duration. It shouldn't be able to outlast an actual radar, but it should give you a window of opportunity to get the hell out of there if you're in a destroyer, for example, and you're busy capping, and a Worcester hidden on the other side of an island 5 kilometers away suddenly lights you up with his radar, and you start taking fire from all directions. Your smoke screen's obviously not going to work. Your engine boost will work, but you're still going to be in radar range for at least another minute. Popping the consumable and jamming the enemy radar for 7 seconds, maybe 10 seconds. Not long enough, even with the engine boost up, for you to get out of radar range, but maybe long enough for you to get to a position where there's some solid cover between you and everybody who's shooting at you, and who is going to be shooting at you, when the radar jammer expires and you get lit up on radar again. You could maybe even take it one step further. Obviously, a radar jammer consumable in that respect would be a very selfish thing. It would only really be of use to the person being radared. But what if it also jammed the minimap? Then you'd have to make the choice. Are you going to save your radar consumable for when you need it, or are you going to actually use it to help the team? So, we kind of liked that idea. Also, you'd have to make the choice. You'd have to give up something else useful in order to get the radar consumable, whether that's, the radar jammer consumable, whether that's your smoke screen, your engine boost, your heel, whatever. But that was one idea that seemed to be gathering a bit of traction amongst the community contributors, and it was funny, but while we were talking about it on Discord, I couldn't help but notice more and more of the developers suddenly started logging on. And while they didn't comment directly, it did seem rather obvious that they were paying close attention to the conversation. So, yeah, anyway, radar. Probably one of, if not the biggest, bones of contention in World of Warships at the moment, but they are looking at it with a view to refining it. Next question. And by the way, these first questions, they're not really being credited to one person in particular, but these were the kind of questions that a whole bunch of you seem to be asking. And this question is, can we have more lower tier missions and events, please? Turns out that a substantial minority of people do still seem to play tier 2 and 3 ships longer than they absolutely need to. The answer from the development team was, lower tier missions aren't something we wish to introduce due to seal clubbing, which could negatively impact the experience of new players. Lower tier events are something we will continue to do from time to time, but we don't intend on making them more frequent than they are already. Yeah, disappointing, but you can kind of understand the reasoning behind it. I mean, anytime they introduce a new line of ships, Pan-Asian destroyers for example, you go back down to tier 2 and 3 and suddenly there's all kinds of Pan-Asian destroyers in play. You got to start somewhere. At the same time, it's appalling how many tier 2 and 3 destroyers you do see running around with a concealment expert build, survivability expert, and more often than not, usually also seem to have the radio position finding skill. A player with a couple of hundred games under their belt already has a massive advantage over somebody who's just started playing World of Warships and is playing tier 2 and 3 for the first time. You give them a 19-point captain into the bargain, and it's like shooting fish in a barrel. Amusing, but not something that the developers are keen to encourage. And if they were to introduce more lower tier, when I say lower tier, I mean below tier 4 campaigns and events into the game, it would be carnage for the new players. So you can kind of understand where they're coming from on that one. Next question, which also seemed to be quite popular. More operations, please. Now, the answer to this one, presently we're fine-tuning the operations currently in rotation to ensure the best experience for players, and whilst more may be introduced in the future, development of operations is not currently a high priority. Now, operations fans, before you all start getting disappointed, bear in mind a couple of things. First, this question was asked a couple of weeks ago, and in the time it took them to get back to us, we've seen the reintroduction of an old operation in a new form, Operation Dynamo, this time rebalanced for tier 6 and 7 destroyers, and if you have it, HMS Cossack, the tier 8. We've also had the news of the Halloween special event operation, which is going to feature submarines for the first time. So while it is kind of disappointing to hear them saying that development of future operations is not currently a high priority, you do still have to bear in mind that, well, we've just received a new operation, and it wasn't that long ago that they introduced Operation Cherry Blossom, and we've got the Halloween operation, although it's not an operation, it's an event, but it works like an operation, and this is all despite the fact that they're saying development of operations is not currently a high priority. Next up, we've got some questions from specific people that didn't seem to be as popular as the preceding questions, but I thought were interesting questions and deserve to be asked anyway. So from, and I apologise if I'm mangling your name, this one was from Anabav Mondal. He was wondering about two things. Funnily enough, we have actually already covered this. His first question, maybe add a consumable to jam radar. And his second question, when are we likely to see Russian battleships? The answer to this, radar is something that we are looking into, as well as possibly some updates to the consumables, but we're not ready to comment on either at this stage. And as far as Russian battleships are concerned, please pay attention to the developer's blog for the latest announcements regarding upcoming ships we're introducing into the game. Yeah, they were never going to do a shock reveal of the new Russian battleship line in Mingles with Jingles. It's worth a try, but it was never going to happen. Next up, and I didn't take the name of the person who asked this question, but it was a decent question, so will the ability to use a controller natively be added? Many of the disability control devices emulate the use of a game controller. It's worth adding, by the way, at this point, and this is from me, that the game does already seem to get a lot of praise from the disabled community for being relatively easy to play. The answer to the question was no, but if you are keen to play World of Warships using a game controller, check out World of Warships Legends, coming to consoles soon. Next question from KWatt. Will the Miyogi please get more buffs or be removed? It's one of those stopgap tier 4 battleships that ends up a turn-off for many grinding the Japanese battleships. The answer? Our balancing team are always analysing ships in the game to ensure they remain competitive at their respective tiers. No plans are currently scheduled for the tier 4 Imperial Japanese Navy battleship. It's also worth pointing out that the Miyogi did get buffed recently. It's now one of the more accurate battleships in the game. Next question, and again, not from any one specific person. Are the devs actively looking towards solutions to encourage battleships to get into the thick of battle in order to combat the issue of battleships sniping from the map border? The answer? Not specifically, though you will note recent changes to maps that promote better gameplay from all classes. I think it's also worth pointing out, and again this is from me, not from the game developers, and well, again this doesn't really help anybody at tier 8, 7, 6, 5, and so on and so on. This only really applies to tier 9 and 10. But the new Arms Race game mode does not see a lot of battleships camping the map border. It definitely rewards ships that get into the thick of the action. Unfortunately, it only applies to tier 9 and 10 ships. Doubly unfortunately, it's highly unlikely that they're going to introduce an arms race mode for anything other than tier 9 or 10 ships. I'm pretty sure part of the reason why Arms Race was introduced, and I'm also reasonably sure that one of the developers has actually said this themselves, was to take some of the matchmaking strain off the tier 8s, to reduce the number of tier 9s and 10s in the matchmaking pool so that the tier 8s don't find themselves at the bottom of the fishing pool as often as they currently do. And unfortunately, while I appreciate the idea, they appear to have possibly shot themselves in the foot a little, because it turns out that you can't actually grind out your legendary modules for your tier 10 ships in the arms race. And so we have been seeing a number of tier 9 and 10 players, or tier 10 players in particular, who have been playing Arms Race and loved it and thought it was great, and then realised they weren't actually making any progress to unlocking the legendary modules on their Yamatos and Khabarovsks and Des Moines and Montanas. And so they just abandoned it and went straight back into random battles. So I can see a simple solution to this, but how long it takes for Wargaming to actually, solve it remains to be seen. Next question. Are the devs thinking about the possibility about revamping the skill tree for captains in order to organise by ship type? Well, the answer was the skill tree has undergone some changes in 0.7.9, but nothing radical is planned in the short term or immediate future. Okay, a couple of things about that. You may or may not have noticed that while you can't, for example, filter your skill tree by cruiser captains or battleship captains or destroyer captains or whatever, what they did do in the latest patch, and I have noticed that it is actually adaptive, and I'll explain what I mean by that. But what they did do in the latest patch is that they have put a really don't be stupid sticker over the various different skills that don't really apply to the ship or the captain of the ship that you're currently picking skills for. Now, they're not stopping you from picking those skills, but they're recommending that you don't. If you want to be an idiot, then by all means go ahead and pick the aircraft expert rear gunner skill for your destroyer captain, but you will get zero use out of it. It'll just be wasted skill points. This is, however, an adaptive filter, and I'll explain what I mean by that. Let's say, for example, you're picking the skills that you're going to assign to the captain of your Khabarovsk, the Russian tier 10 destroyer. Now, the Khabarovsk can choose between either having a smokescreen or having a heal. Now, let's say, for example, you've got the smokescreen consumable slotted on your Khabar. and you go to pick the skill points for the captain, you will note that there is no "Don't be stupid" sticker over the smokescreen expert skill. However, if you go back to the ship and you swap out the smokescreen for a heal, there is a "Don't pick this, you must be an idiot" sticker over the smokescreen expert skill. And that applies to the signal flags as well. If you don't have the repair party consumable on the Khabarovsk, if you've instead elected to go with the smoke consumable, the India Delta signal flag, the one that boosts the amount that you get from your repair party by 20%, suddenly has a "Don't be stupid, this flag is useless to you" sticker over the top of it. But if you swap it out, that sticker goes away. So it is context sensitive, depending on the configuration of the ship that you're looking at. Next question. What are the current priorities of the World of Warships development team? For example, are you focused on the carrier rework, or are British destroyers on your mind? Or are you looking towards balancing ships first before adding new ones? The answer was all of the above are currently being worked on. Ship balancing is an ongoing task that has its own separate team and specialists assigned to it. This question from Dark Dragon 7 Able. My idea for World of Warships is to make captain training acceleration option if the ship hits its elite status, and all further experience gained on this ship will only be going towards improving the commander. It's like in World of Tanks, the crew acceleration training button that you can tick. The reply was there already exists a method to accelerate training through the conversion of elite XP. If I can expand on this one myself a little, initially when I heard this suggestion I thought that's a really good idea. The problem is that, well, there is already an option to accelerate captain training. Once a captain reaches 19 points, any further experience earned on that captain becomes becomes Elite Commander XP, which can be used on any commander. Plus, World of Warships isn't exactly the same as World of Tanks. There's a definite limit, an achievable limit in World of Warships to how far you can skill up a commander. You reach 19 points, that's your limit. It's not like in World of Tanks, where you've got multiple different crew members on a vehicle and a ridiculous number of skills that you can actually assign towards those crew members. And to all practical intents and purposes, you are never going to realistically get every available skill for every available crew member on a tank in World of Tanks. You can hit the cap relatively quickly in World of Warships, so introducing another mechanic to earn captain experience into World of Warships, I can kind of understand why they wouldn't want to do that. Final question. This came from, oh wow, I know I'm going to mispronounce this, Yaling Oz. And I did like this suggestion. World of Warships has an option to mute a player's text messages. But World of Warships is also a pretty civilized space, and in the last, say, 3,000 games, I can only think of one player who would have been better off muting rather than letting fly his invective. On the other hand, players who spam the function key callouts, specifically the Shift F12 callout, can be incredibly aggravating. The same with players who ping the map like they're paid to advertise the site of a discount carpet sale, can be incredibly aggravating. Usually the same jerk does both. In World of Tanks, muting a player blocks their callouts and map pings too. I would love that to be the case in World of Warships. It might even reduce team killing, which is pretty rare compared to World of Tanks, because the only way to shut up a map and function key spammer in World of Warships is to sink their ship. Oh boy, I can't begin to tell you how much I love that suggestion. Not the team killing part. No, it's not what I meant. If I block somebody, if I mute a player, if I blacklist a player in World of Warships, it's basically because they're a massive arsehole and I never want to hear from them again. And you can do that in World of Tanks. Well, you can up to a limit. I hadn't been playing World of Tanks for very long before I discovered that I was suddenly no longer able to add people to my blacklist, because it turns out that the blacklist is limited to 1,000 players. So I was suddenly unable to add arseholes to my I never want to hear from you again list. And I did find that the blacklist in World of Tanks was also a very, very useful tool in keeping track of the arseholes, because sooner or later we're going to run into them again. And if you ended up in a battle with somebody on your blacklist, they were highlighted in red, so you knew this guy is a massive douche nozzle, do not rely on him. You can't do that in World of Warships. It doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it is incredibly aggravating when somebody just will not stop pinging the map or issuing chat commands. And it doesn't matter if you block them, it doesn't matter if you mute their text messages, it doesn't matter if you add them to your ignore list. They can still ping the map, they can still spam team chat with chat commands. And this is something that I have actually suggested to the World of Warships developers myself. If you block somebody because you never want to hear from them again, then can you make it so we never have to hear from them again? Because that's what it's supposed to be for. And this was actually taken on board by the developers, noted as a good suggestion, and passed further up the line. We haven't seen it happen yet, but it is something that they are aware of, and it is something that they have said they're going to be working on. And that's pretty much it for the Q&A with the World of Warship developers. I do apologise if you asked a question and it didn't get passed up the line. I try to pick from the most popular questions, the ones that most people seem to have, particularly radar, for example, which is always a hot topic, and also the questions that I thought might be of more interest to a wider audience, but there's just no way I could ask all of the questions. We've already exceeded 21 minutes worth of running time, and there's a limit to just exactly how much of the developers' time I can monopolise with your questions. So I'd like to thank the developers for taking the time to answer the questions that they did, and I hope that you lot found it interesting. And now, to finish up this episode of Mingles with Jingles, it's time to answer some of the questions that you guys have been asking me on the Salt Mines Discord server in the Mingles with the Jingles channel. Oh man, these names. I swear you guys only make these names up so you can watch me squirm as I try to pronounce them. Exiant asked, Jingles, where do you see yourself in 10 years? You realise in 10 years I'm going to be 58 years old. What am I going to be doing when I'm 58? Am I still going to be doing this? Probably. I mean, I don't see it being any less enjoyable when I'm 58 compared to 48. I will be considerably older and probably considerably crapper, but, well, it doesn't seem to be hurting my chances now. Am I still going to be playing the same games? Oh, I don't know. Just how long do you think World of Warships and World of Tanks legs are? I mean, World of Tanks has lasted a decent while. What other new games do you think Wargaming are going to push out between now and then? They have just announced that they've bought a small UK developer, and they're developing an MMO. No idea what it's about. And then there's this other sort of tanks and helicopter gunships project that they have, that they're keeping a very tight lid on. There were a bunch of people put YouTube videos out of alpha footage and immediately got hit with DCMA takedowns for breaking non-disclosure agreements. I don't know if you caught any of that. It looks pretty good. What did they call it? I can't remember. I'm sure if you Google it, you'll be able to find it. You know, it's not just World of Tanks and World of Warships. Although I certainly hope they're still doing World of Warships 10 years from now, because I absolutely love the game. But what form it's going to be in 10 years down the line, I have no idea. I also have no idea how many of you lot are going to be watching me 10 years from now. Hopefully, all of you. But, well, you know, times change. People's tastes change, particularly as you grow older. I don't even know if I'll still be enjoying playing these kind of games at all 10 years from now. But I guess there's only one way to find out. See you in 10 years. Next question. Jifo wanted to know, as a fellow Portsmouth native who has sadly moved away for work, the key question I want to ask is, what's your current favourite restaurant in Portsmouth and Gosport? Oh, this is an easy one. My favourite restaurant in Portsmouth and Gosport, and has been for well over 20 years, is a little place called Rosie's Vineyard, down in Elm Grove in Southsea. It's a tiny little wine bar and bistro. It's the kind of place where they don't, well, actually they do now, but when I first started eating there, they didn't actually have a set menu. What would happen is the head chef would basically just go down to the market and down to the fish market and buy whatever looked good. And that's what would go up on, well, it wasn't really a menu, but they'd have chalkboards on the wall where they would write down whatever today's menu was. There were a couple of dishes that were, you know, reasonably popular that you could always guarantee were going to be on. But the menu was never exactly the same from day to day. It was a fantastic place. This was back in the day when you could still smoke in a restaurant, and so I had a very good friend, went by the name of Dixie, who was a chef in the Navy. and we were both based at HMS Nelson. We'd both been on board HMS Coventry prior to that, and we'd both gone back to HMS Raleigh at the same time. He was a gunner, and then he decided, screw this, I want to be a chef. I'd been a radio operator, and I decided, screw this, I want to be a writer. So we both went through retraining at the same time, and we both ended up being posted to HMS Nelson, which is the Royal Navy Barracks in Portsmouth. And once a month, we'd go down to Rosie's Vineyard. I'd pay for it one month, he'd pay for it the next. And it was just a fantastic place. The food was amazing. They sold no beer. It was spirits and wine only. And you could sit there and have a fantastic meal. And on a Friday, there was a jazz band playing in the corner. I'm not a great fan of jazz music, but it was, it was an experience. And then when you'd finished your meal, you'd sit there with a glass of brandy, smoking a cigar, and playing backgammon. They actually had a whole bunch of backgammon and chess and draft sets behind the bar. And you could just sit there for as long as you liked, drinking, smoking cigars, and playing checkers or backgammon or whatever. And it's still more or less exactly the same today. The only real difference is they now actually have a proper menu. But this is by far my favourite place to eat in Portsmouth. It's not my favourite place to eat in the world. There's a place in Cartagena in Colombia. In fact, I've even been thinking of going back to Colombia for a holiday just so I can eat at this place again. I can't remember what it's called, but I have looked it up and it does still exist. I think I was on HMS Manchester at the time, and I've only eaten at this place twice. But there was a guy called John Henry, who was from St. Vincent. At the time, the Royal Navy were doing a lot of recruiting in former colonies. So we had a lot of people joining the Navy from Fiji, a lot of people joining the Navy from St. Vincent and St. Lucia, and so on and so on. Anyway, John and I were both, we enjoyed our food. And since he was from St. Vincent in particular, he enjoyed seafood. So we would always, anytime we got to run ashore anywhere, we would go looking for some place good to eat. And I can't remember how we found this place. We were just wandering along the seafront, ended up in the marina, and we saw this restaurant. And it looked expensive. I mean, it looked seriously expensive. But expensive in Colombia isn't the same as expensive in London, for example. And plus, we'd been at sea for weeks. All our pay was saved up. What else were we going to spend it on? So we thought, screw it, we'll go in. We'll have a meal here. This was the kind of place that had valet parking for yachts. I'm not making this up. While we were sitting there eating, a cabin cruiser docked it had its own jetty, and a valet actually took the keys off the millionaire and his family that came off this cabin cruiser and parked it in the marina for him. Seriously. That's what that's how exclusive this place was. And it was expensive. It was certainly the most expensive place I have ever eaten at, but it was still affordable for us because of the conversion rate between, the pound sterling and the Colombian, whatever the Colombian currency was. But holy shit, the food was amazing. Just to give you an example, I'm pretty sure I've talked about this in an episode of Mingles with Jingles before, but just to give you an example, we had a seafood platter that had lobster and just all kinds of just lovely fish on it. And then we ordered a dessert. We thought, after waiting 40 minutes from the main course before the dessert arrived, we thought they'd forgotten about us, but they were actually... Let me explain what the dessert was. When I looked at it on the menu, it said it was inspired by the local women going to the market and bringing the fruit home. And when it arrived, I suddenly understood why it had taken 40 minutes. It was made out of confection, and it was a model, a little statue, I say little, it was about 10 inches tall, of a Colombian woman made out of icing and fondant. And on her head she had a basket where there were all these miniature fruit made from real fruit. The chef had spent the best part of 40 minutes making this thing. It was just unbelievable. That's the best place I've ever eaten in, bar none. And I've eaten in some pretty good places because that was basically what I did. I was a bit of a food snob, which is bad news if you're in the military. And that's what I did. Other people would go ashore and just go whoring and drinking, and myself, I looked for the good places to eat. And that was it. I can't remember what it was called, but you can look it up. Cartagena in Colombia. Absolutely amazing restaurant on the marina. Next question. Well, it's not so much a question as a comment. This is from Johnny. He said, "Hey Jingles, just to follow up to a previous video where you spoke about disabled players. Many commenters came from the autistic community, so I'm hoping that a sufficient amount have also joined the Discord channel. I'm the proud dad of a 6-year-old autistic boy who loves playing Minecraft. Since he learned about the game from watching me play, we bought him a copy and rent a server that we can play on together. When he's a little older and better able to interact with people online, we're going to sign him up to Autcraft, which is a server for autistic children to play on, also run by an autism dad. Besides playing Minecraft with our son, we also work to raise awareness about autism and look to help parents in South Africa with information about treatments and benefits available to parents. My wife is a phenomenal researcher, and we've set up a blog where she's documented the various issues we have getting help and access to benefits and therapies. She also researches different medical aspects of autism. If anyone reading this is interested, they're welcome to PM Johnny for the URL to the blog. That's Johnny on the Salt Mines Discord. Bit of a long post, I know, so thank you for reading this far and keep up the great work." Well, thanks for taking the time to write all of that down, Johnny. It was my pleasure to read it out to a wider audience, and if any of you are in a similar situation, that's Johnny on the Salt Mines Discord server. Send him a PM. He will be only too happy to help you out. Next question from Binkley Stephen. Nice quick question. Jingles, will you do a series on Subnautica Below Zero when it comes out? This is the new DLC for Subnautica that's due out in a couple of months. All going well. Very, very simple answer to this question. You're damn right I will. I absolutely loved Subnautica, and I can't wait to play the new DLC. This next one comes from Bob Mull, and again, it's not so much a question as a response to an issue that I raised in a previous episode of Mingles with Jingles, specifically when I was talking about the radical difference in philosophies that you seem to see between the world of tanks and the world of warships developers and the interactions between the various different communities. It's probably simpler if I just read you his message. You were talking about World of Warships, the developers talk to you, and World of Tanks, the marketing community talk to you. I was once Community Relations Director for Mythic Entertainment, part of Electronic Arts, and oversaw Warhammer Online, Ultima Online, and Dark Age of Camelot community support. Mythic closed shop some time ago, and I now do much more mundane web support for the Department of Homeland Security, but that's a different story. I get your desire to speak directly with developers, but a well-run community support team is a benefit to players. Ideally, they're the voice of the player when talking internally, and the voice of the developer when talking externally. If a game is run well, community support does all of the gathering of customer questions, needs and issues, and finds the pain points and gets the developers to answer and address the items of importance. What's more, they keep well-meaning developers from digging holes for themselves in the studio by revealing things that might be entirely conjectural, making mistakes, or just generally being over-eager to share things, which I get. They're excited about their work. At the same time, they should be pushing the developers to do regularly scheduled discussions with the customers, so people like you get that direct line to the creators of the game. Community support does all of the logistics of making sure those discussions come together and are well run. You might find this hard to believe, but some developers are not good communicators, and they need someone to push them to produce the information, and then organise and clean that up into a proper article. You might see the developer name on the article, and they might be answering questions about it, but odds are they didn't get there on their own. Community support should also be looking at items in development and identifying things that are obviously going to create pain points with players. Developers sometimes fall in love with their ideas and lose sight of the bigger picture, or how players who don't play the game like themselves will be affected by a change. Community support should be looking out for power gamers, casual gamers and noobs alike. The problem with community support is that if a game is going really well, you're almost not needed. A lot of what you need to do, you can do transparently and stay out of the way. When things are going poorly for a game, there's nothing you can really do in your role if the studio isn't committed to fixing things properly. This is when community support is forced to become the shield that defends developers from angry players or defends the players from the angry developers. When community support appears to be marketing, they're no longer community support, they are marketing. Good community support requires transparency and the trust of the player community. Direct marketing undermines that completely, and players will quickly disregard a community team that's spewing the corporate marketing line. The TLDR version, community support can be a good thing if done correctly, and it's a symptom of the larger problem when done poorly. I hope that gives you a little insight. Keep up the good work. For the record, I like the non-World of Warships and World of Tanks content the most. That's from Bob Mull. And I thought that was... A lot of that I kind of understood anyway. Some of it I didn't. But I thought the insight that Bob gave into what a good community team should be trying to do and how they should be trying to do it was worth reading out to a wider audience. And I hope you guys got some valuable insight as a result of Bob's massive wall of text. So yeah, Bob, thank you very much. Anyway, we're going from one massive wall of text to yet another massive wall of text in order to finish off this week's episode of Mingles with Jingles. And we're probably going to top out at 40 minutes this week, because when I say massive wall of text, I am absolutely not kidding. Let me just make sure I've got it all. And this one comes complete with pictures. This was from James Copestake. And I'm just going to read you his message, because this one really touched me on a personal level. And who knows, maybe you too. But, you know, not in that way, in a good way. Dear Rear Admiral Jingles, it's a privilege to send you this email. As a US Navy veteran, I had the pleasure of working alongside some of your fellow countrymen during my first deployment in 2009. I served with Assault Craft Unit 2, modern-day Higgins boats, now called LCMs, USS Gunston Hall, and finally on God's cruiser, the USS Anzio, out of Norfolk, Virginia from 2008 to 2012. We called her God's cruiser because despite being commissioned in 1992 and having never seen a dry dock for scheduled maintenance, she always passed inspection and was deemed battle ready, even if she did have a permanent 4-degree list to port. She was a blessed old girl who was run ragged by the country she so dearly served. The needs of the Navy had me transferring all over the fleet. I deployed 3 times with 3 naval units, and by the time I got home as a petty officer 3rd class after 4 years of service, I had more ribbons and warfare pins on my chest than my brother, who at the time was a lieutenant commander and had been in the Navy 8 years longer than I had. At our late father's funeral, my brother jokingly asked me to take some ribbons off my uniform because I was making him look bad. On March the 6th, 2017, you released Mingles with Jingles episode 187. I remember this one. You used Google Maps and toured your old stomping grounds at Portsmouth and showed off your old office, firing range, ships and duty routines. I greatly enjoyed that because it brought back many memories of when I first entered the Navy and was stationed in Great Lakes, Illinois. I remember those long nights of being on duty, checking various buildings in all kinds of weather. My wife and I greatly enjoyed that video because it brought back many great memories for her as well. I truly want to thank you for that video. For you, it was a trip down memory lane, but it helped me open up some doors that I intentionally closed. Transitioning from military service back to civilian life affects everyone differently, but it was incredibly difficult for me. I suffered years of depression and financial hardship. We were down to $36 in the bank at one point and almost had to choose between putting fuel in the car to go to college or food to eat. If our car payment came out that week, we would have been done for. As someone who took pride in being able to provide for my family, I felt like an absolute failure, especially after the financial security and success the Navy provided me. I had a job, but it wasn't what I thought it was, and the paychecks were few and far between. I had the GI Bill to attend college, but there was an issue that prevented the program from giving me my allotted living allowance. I felt lost, angry and disgusted. I blocked out all of my Navy memories because thinking about them brought me pain instead of joy, because in my head I'd made a mistake getting out of the military. I should have stayed in because we wouldn't be suffering. In 2014 I was given the opportunity through a veterans organisation on my college campus to work part-time at my local Veterans Affairs hospital. I instantly took the job. It turned into a full-time career that I take tremendous pride in. I know this will sound ridiculous, but on my first day I went to the cafeteria to get breakfast. It was a galley-style kitchen with stainless steel appliances and a serving line. It was exactly how galleys are on warships. I openly smiled and instantly felt at home. It was the first bit of peace I'd felt in 2 years. I ate the food and the bread was almost stale and the flavours were bland, exactly like Navy chow. It was a tremendous moment that I cherished for the rest of that week. Fast forward to 2017 and I see your Mingles with Jingles episode 187. I've been a proud subscriber for about a year at this point. As I watched it and listened to your stories and explanations, it made me pause and realise that I too have a story to tell about my military service. I watched your video 3 times during my extended lunch break at work, and then went home and made my wife sit down and watch it as well. Later that night I opened Google Maps and took a tour of Naval Station Norfolk, Little Creek Naval Station, Naval Training Command Great Lakes, and all the other port cities and bases I visited overseas. I saw the ships and buildings as I remembered them. I tried to guess which ships they were based on, which pier it was, and the approximate time that satellite image was captured. All of this helped me restore those memories that I'd blocked out. I'd reached a point in my life where I could look back on my naval service and not feel regret for leaving, but pride once again for having done it. I do have a great story to share with you that I don't even think my wife has heard. We were less than one day into passing Gibraltar and entering the Mediterranean Sea. It was about 0200. We were on our way to the Red Sea for anti-piracy ops off the Somali coast. Yep, been there, done that. Anyway, sorry, on with the story. I worked the night shift on board so I could provide supply parts for the helicopter squadron on our ship. They do their maintenance at night. I was down in our supply office. It's located right next to the main engineering spaces and one deck below the engineering control room. I'm sitting there going over my logs and I start hearing the turbine spool up like a jet engine through the bulkhead next to me. Definitely an odd sound. It continued for about 4 minutes and I started to hear running on the ladder one deck above, muffled, shouting voices. Finally the turbines went silent and the entire ship went dark for a moment. Immediately over one Mike Charlie, the chief engineering says, engineering casualty, loss of number 1 and 2, GTG, that's gas turbine generators. 2 minutes go by and I start to hear other turbines spool up and shut down. We were dead in the water. Our captain was asleep, of course, but by the time I went up to see what was going on, the captain had somehow gotten dressed and come down 5 decks and down half the length of the ship and was standing at the hatch to the engineering spaces, swearing and screaming, demanding a status report. It was so shocking, it was hilarious. He went down into the engine room and didn't come out again for 3 hours. The executive officer would stand at the hatch and you could hear metal banging as the captain yelled orders up to him. The XO would turn around with a bewildered look on his face, but the captain refused to leave the engine room. He was getting his hands dirty with everyone else trying to get us operational. We were near Sigonella Naval Station and they sent a tug out for us. We were pierside for about 4 hours, unloaded some stores since we were there, and then got underway again. It was the only time I'd ever seen a commanding officer roll his sleeves up and start turning wrenches. I respected him before that moment, but after that there was not a man I respected more. He demanded the best out of his men, but he was not above getting dirty. For the rest of that deployment, whether it was UN rep or training, he was out there doing it with us, teaching and leading by example. He was the highest ranking commanding officer I ever had, and the hardest working and most down-to-earth man. We held a cigar social on the Fantail a few days after the engineering incident, and he came down with his pipe and shared a smoke with us. He'd give crew members 48 hours liberty passes for their birthdays. He'd stop you on the passageway and ask you about your family. If you walked by and you called attention on deck, he'd put his hand on your shoulder and say, "At ease, son, I'm the one that's in your way. You carry on and keep doing a great job." He knew all 350 of us on a personal level. On June 25th, 2012, my last day in the Navy, the skipper called me into his quarters and we had a 20-minute chat about where my life would take me next. He gave me his personal phone number and said, "If you ever need anything, you call me." He did this for everyone. I was no one special. But it was that simple act to reach out right before I took a huge step into the next chapter of my life, on top of how he treated us every day, that really struck a chord with me. I did everything I could not to cry, but I failed. Everything I'd known was the Navy. I loved it so much and I regretted nothing about it. I enlisted 12 days after graduating high school and I never looked back. This was my dream. I didn't know what life was like outside, and I didn't want to know, but mentally and physically I was exhausted and I knew I wasn't capable of serving to my fullest potential any longer. Injuries had left me limited physically, and I wanted to go out on my own terms before the Navy made that decision for me. The skipper put his hand on my shoulder and said, "You're going to be just fine." I never did call him. I wanted to prove to him that I could survive, but I still carry his phone number in my wallet. His name was Captain John M. Dory, and he left an impression on my 21-year-old self that I'll never forget. I'm emotional now just telling you about it. He was a truly great man. Still is, by the way. Excuse me. You're not making me cry. I'm not crying, James, okay? I just had something in my throat. Jingles, because of you, I've placed all my photos, shellback ceremony certificates and memorabilia back up around my home and my office. My thousands of deployment photos on my external hard drive are being uploaded, and I'm reconnecting with my old shipmates. You helped me open those doors and remind me of those incredible, and some not so incredible, memories of my time in the Navy. Just remembering that story of Captain Dory losing his ship when the engines died made me laugh and smile. There are so many stories that I can now write down, remember and share with my wife, friends and my daughter when she gets old enough. I can't thank you enough. I've told my wife for over a year now that I would email you to thank you. Initially, this email was going to contain a World of Warships replay with me and the Scharnhorst having an epic duel to the death with an Atlanta and Flint at close range to decide the game. But I feel this message is more important and very much overdue. I've provided 4 photos for you. They're popping up on screen right now. The first is the day we got home to Norfolk from my final deployment. My wife met me on the pier and it was a homecoming right out of the movies. The second photo was taken by my father-in-law, who came aboard the last 2 days of the deployment for his first and only Tiger cruise. The third photo is of myself and Captain Dory during that cigar social in the Med. And the fourth photo is God's cruiser herself, USS Anzio, the second love of my life. Due to the sheer number of emails you receive and the absurd length of this email, I'm not expecting this to make it into one of your videos. Ah ha 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 ha! Well, I'm happy to disappoint you, James. But I hope that you at least see this. I want you to know how much of an impact you've had on me and my family. I can look back on my naval service with a smile and without regret thanks to you. I'm indebted to you. Once a sailor, always a sailor. Respectfully yours, Logistics Specialist 3rd Class, Surface Warfare, James E. Copestake, US Navy, 2008 to 2012. You're not going to make me cry, James. But I can safely say I know exactly what you're talking about. Regarding Captain Dory, I think we've all had officers, not always commanding officers. Sometimes your executive officer or just the head of your department or whatever. But we've, if we're lucky, we've been privileged to know an officer like that. I've known very few bad naval officers. I've known a lot, the vast majority of good naval officers, but I can probably count on the fingers of one hand the great naval officers that I've had the privilege of serving with. People that just inspired so much confidence that you would happily go anywhere and fight anybody for them and not care because you had that confidence in them. And Captain John Dory sounds just like that kind of guy. I wish I'd known him, but I'm happy that you did. And I'm also happy that you've managed to put your naval service into perspective, because it's a huge part of your life and you shouldn't forget it. That's it for this week's episode of Mingles with Jingles. A mammoth edition. We're coming up to 50 minutes. I better get this shut down, rendered and uploaded onto YouTube and get my ass into bed. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you to everybody who sent in their questions. And as always, take care. And I'll catch you next time.